There are more nomad capitalists and also digital nomads and perpetual travelers than ever before. The world is more mobile than ever before. And oftentimes people are traveling very quickly with nonstop travel. They're one country today, another country tomorrow. And the question then becomes, if you don't really have any kind of home, where do you pay tax? I'm going to give you my thoughts on that issue in this video. Hey, I'm Andrew Henderson, and if you want to learn how Nomad Capitalist can help you legally reduce your taxes and live a global citizen lifestyle, keeping more of your own money, having more freedom, go to nomadcapitalist.com. Now, whenever I answer tax questions, and obviously I'm not giving tax advice here, so don't use this as tax advice. You can go to nomadcapitalist.com and learn how to get help with that if you need it. But there's often two categories of people. There are U.S. citizens, and then there's everyone else. So if you are a U.S. person, as we call it, that could include a long-term green card holder or other U.S. persons, this issue is actually a little bit better. So U.S. citizens are taxed no matter where they live. I have plenty of videos on that. But the cool thing is you don't really have to be anywhere else. You are, by default, a U.S. tax resident. When you go to open bank accounts, you'll give them your social security number. They'll report you for FATCA. You don't really need to live anywhere else. You might need a physical address in the United States to receive mail or to say, hey, here's my home in the United States, potentially. But it's actually an open shut case. That's kind of the one cool benefit is you are paying those taxes, or at least you're liable to pay taxes to the United States. And so therefore, that's your tax home. I'm a U.S. taxpayer. They don't really need to know anything else. And because the United States is obviously a pretty well-respected country, it's not like it's it's known for lots of scams and stuff. Most countries, most banks, most entities will take a U.S. tax residence pretty seriously. Doesn't mean that they'll all want to do business with you, but they will take it pretty seriously. Oh, and by the way, even though you are liable for tax in the United States, doesn't mean that you have to pay full boat, because there are plenty of exclusions and exemptions and planning you can do even today to be offshore, if that's where you're living. Now, for everyone else, we have talked about it is becoming harder to live nowhere. I made a video on that and talked about how it is becoming more difficult. Why? Well, for one thing, the FATCA, which is the U.S. reporting system that requires basically every financial institution in the world to phone back to the U.S. government and report on U.S. persons and their bank accounts abroad. The rest of the world, they came up with what's called CRS, the Common Reporting Standard, which allows for information sharing among now more than 100 countries. And so, if you're a French resident, banking in Singapore, they're going to exchange the information. And so the question became, and for other reasons as well, but the question became, where do you live? And really what they mean is, where do you pay tax? And so it's an interesting question. What if you are a French citizen, you were a French resident, but now you left, you went through the process of deregistering and becoming tax non-resident and all of that. Most countries have that process. And now you're just traveling around the world. You're in Serbia today, Malaysia tomorrow, Kathmandu the next month. No matter what the pace is, you really haven't established a home. Perhaps you don't have an address anywhere. You certainly aren't long enough anywhere to qualify to pay taxes because you're moving around so quickly. What do you do? It is becoming an issue, and there's no exact one right answer. But generally, what I think is a good idea if you're in this situation is you should have some kind of home. You should find at least a base where you can go and spend some time and at least say, hey, here's where I live. Now, if they say, hey, where do you pay taxes? I'm also not going to give you legal advice, but there's different ways you could approach that. You could approach that as, am I liable to pay tax there, even if I owe nothing? So certain zero tax or territorial tax countries, or countries with tax exemptions for new residents or expats or whatever, you might be liable. You might be a tax resident, but you might not own anything. And there are countries, for example, like Antigua and others, where you can just go and obtain tax residence, spend a nominal amount of time living in the country, and there's your tax residence. That could work. If they ask, where do you live? They might want to know, where are you actually living? So there's different questions that a bank, for example, might ask you. And so having a base, potentially having a tax residence, I think are very important elements. this is where it's getting more complicated because you have this rise of perpetual travelers, of nomad capitalists, and so now it's a bit more of an issue, right? And I think it's going to become more of an issue in years in the future because, when you have almost nobody doing it, nobody seems to bother too much. But now you have this great mobility, and governments and banks and everybody else, they want to fight, they want to make sure people are paying their taxes, they want to make sure people aren't laundering money, they want everything to be in compliance, and there's so much transparency now that you really need to have a place that you call home. You probably need to have a tax residence because not only on the banking side for just operating your life and your business, are you going to want that, but you're also going to want to tell your country increasingly where you're going. More and more countries are now being like, okay, great, you're not here, but where are you? And really enforcing, okay, where are your ties somewhere else? What I talked about before here is the idea of taking a scorched earth approach. When you leave your country, don't keep a house sitting around that you can go back to in the future, especially if you're not going to have a house where you're living somewhere else. So there's a lot of tax planning required in doing this properly. But the bottom line is having a house, having a place where you live, having a place where you keep some stuff, where you go to the doctor, maybe you have a driver's license, whatever. Having a place to live is important. Now, I understand that people, and I used to be one of them, who they just want to travel endlessly around the world. They want to have no fixed base. It's an interesting lifestyle to them. I understand that, and that might mean you want to find a residence and a tax residence that require less of your presence. You may still need to spend a bit more time there than you do in some other places, which if you're not spending much time in any given place, shouldn't be that difficult. But these are the realities of the world today. Simply being in a new country every week is going to make your life more complicated if you don't have those tools, the residence and likely the tax residence, okay? This is where the world is becoming more complicated. People have asked me, Andrew, why would you not want to be a U.S. citizen anymore? Let me just give you an example. This is like the abridged version of my final U.S. tax return. I actually paid $1,088 in this tax return because I had some U.S. rental property. I was in the country 6 days, so I didn't pay on any of my foreign businesses or anything like that. But this is the tax return, and it's kind of like a small town phone book, not as big as some people's, but complexity is now even more. And I think complexity for people who aren't U.S. citizens is going to become more because countries want to know where you're going. Now, you may not have to file a tax return every year the way that Americans do, but they are going to want to know where you're going. You are going to have to fill out more forms. And so for me, the taxes, $1,088. All things being equal, you would pay $1,088 to be a U.S. citizen, right? That's not the money's not the issue. Fear of filling out one of these forms wrong is the bigger issue. And for me, personal reasons, just not wanting to identify as that, I still go to the gym and I'm fighting people. Like, where are you from? It's complicated. Because I just don't want to, say I'm American. But anyway, to the issue of where do you pay taxes if you have no home, if you're traveling around, you need to establish a home, okay? And there are all new kinds of tax residence programs. Antigua is one that I mentioned. They come and go. Again, if you want to live in a certain country, you can live in the UAE, for example, for 6 months a year, 180 days. There's your tax residence. They don't have tax in the UAE, and then you can spend the other 6 months doing what you want. If you don't want to spend 6 months in one place, and there are many places you can spend 6 months, by the way, if you don't want to spend 6 months, you need to go and get one of these other tax programs where you make an investment or you pay a small amount of tax. Gibraltar and Jersey, for example, have these kind of programs where you can go and spend a lesser amount of time, and there you go. Obviously, you want to have a lawyer, you want to have a tax professional, you want to do things in line with wherever you're banking, so you'll want to do some proper planning. Okay, this is kind of 37,000-foot ideas. But where do you pay tax if you have no home? Bottom line is, have a home. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, Learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.